Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
I mean,
I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye.
What does confrontational mean? It means you'll fight for what you believe.
Enough was enough! And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother!
It is not merely our privilege to be strong, it is our duty to be strong.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who are watching live on YouTube, Facebook and Rumble, and thank you to everyone who will watch this later on today. We've got a really big episode today with a very important guest, but before we get there, I'll let you know how you can support us here at Commanding the Narrative like I do each and every time. It's by going to Buy Me a Coffee. Now, if you can go to Buy Me a Coffee and throw us a few dollars there, it helps to pay for the stream, helps to pay for the website, and also, most importantly, gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside. So we know that's very important to do. So if you can head to Buy Me a Coffee and support us there, please do so. Also, go to our website, commandingthenarrative.com. Very easy to remember, commandingthenarrative.com. Top right-hand corner, you can hit the sign up button. You can sign up to our weekly newsletter to stay up to date with all the podcasts, articles, and events that are coming up in our little sphere here. So please do that. It's a lot of great feedback coming to me from the newsletter. So that is one way to keep up to date. Don't rely on social media these days, especially with this misinformation and disinformation legislation seeming to be looming ever closer. Also, on September 29th, it's a Sunday, the Environment and Energy Forum. It's fast approaching, so don't miss out. Get your tickets now. You can head to the Eventbrite page. The link will be in the show notes to get your tickets. Di Lee, the member for Fowler, will be speaking. Matthew Kamanzuli, Craig Kelly, Councillor Steve Christou, Wade Northhausen from Billboard Battalion will be there. Kevin Lockray's coming down from Ballina. If you know this podcast, you know all about Kevin, and also Paul Vallejo will be speaking, a whole host of speakers. So please get your tickets. Don't miss out on that one. And just finally, also, if you want to help support the Light Newspaper Australia, you can head to their website, thelight.australia.com, and become a distributor. There is a link to become a distributor. If you're in the Sydney area or close to the Northern Beaches, there's 2 pallets that have already been paid for. So all you need to do is pick them up and distribute them. Just call the number 0406 861 816 and you can be a distributor for the Light. But today, we've got 2 guests. One's a returning guest, Emma Bowman. She's a 5th-generation farmer from Dunedoo. We had her on back in episode 12 of Commanding the Narrative, so go back and listen to that if you want to get more of a background on Emma. She's in the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, battling everything that's going on there. If you've been following this podcast, you'll be well aware of these 5 renewable energy zones around New South Wales that everyday Aussies are pushing back against because of the scope of these things is just absolutely incredible. And secondly, we have an upper house member of the New South Wales Parliament here from the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party, Mr. Mark Banasiak. Now, he's doing some tremendous work and he's been pushing back against this stuff even from its inception. So let's bring them on now so we can hear more about it. Emma Bowman and Mark Banasiak, welcome back to Commanding the Narrative.
Thanks very much for having me, Stephen.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Stephen.
Now, Mark, before we really get into things, can you just give us, everyone watching, a background of who you are, why you got into politics and why you chose the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party?
Sure. Look, I'm probably wondering why I go into politics every day myself. Look, I'm 42. I was a secondary teacher / deputy principal towards the end of my career. And I just got into the shooting sports through my brother-in-law after I had a fairly serious sporting injury and couldn't really do much. He got me out sort of shooting and hunting and then got into the sporting organisation side of things, and from that I was sort of picked up by the party and identified as someone that could actually do some good work, and sort of started in the mailroom of the party, just doing how to votes on election day, and then they asked me to coordinate a whole area, which was Wollongong, for an election. A case of you do a good job and then you get asked to do a whole heap of other good jobs. So I just effectively worked my way up to the point where I was the chair of the party. So at that point I'd been with the party for about 15 years and was tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, we want you to run in the next election, and was lucky enough to be elected. So, which was, I guess, timely, because I'd gotten a point in my teaching career where I was frustrated with the bureaucracy, and it was a good opportunity to frustrate them back from the other side with what I'd learned and know from the department. So, that's in a nutshell how I got into it. And I guess why the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers Party was, I guess, a lot of people are tired of the major parties, and for me, I saw my sport, my pastime, hunting and fishing, as becoming very political. And if I didn't get involved in that, then I wasn't going to be able to enjoy that for much longer the way it was going. And I've always said the majors have equal experience in stuffing up those major things like roads, hospitals, schools, but there's no one there really representing our personal pastimes and fighting for those pastimes. So that's what the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers is really all about, is protecting those freedoms to do all those fun things that we like doing in the outdoors.
And you've been in the Parliament since 2019, so you're well experienced now. Does the New South Wales Parliament work effectively for the people of New South Wales, in your opinion, overall? I mean, I'm sure you can pick out examples here or there, but overall. Yeah,
look, I think there's certainly things that could be done better, 100%. It probably doesn't engage with the public as well as it could. I think there's probably a lot of misunderstanding of what state members can and can't do, and the powers that they have, and what actually happens on a day-to-day basis on a sitting week. I think that's still a very unclear thing for a lot of people in the general public. They don't see a lot of the stuff that happens. They might see the silly buggers happening in question time, but they don't see all the things that obviously are happening in the background, and the conversations that are happening in the background, and the deals that are being struck in the background. And quite often what happens in the chamber is mere theatre. It's already been sort of predetermined based on discussions outside of the chamber. So I think it's really important for your listeners to understand that, because they need to be having those conversations with their representatives before it gets to the point where we're about to walk into the chamber, because then it's too late. In many cases, people's minds have been made up. So you really need to get in early and get in on the ground floor on an issue, particularly something like this.
No, that's excellent advice, because I think a lot of people struggle with understanding just how the Parliament works and how they can get involved and make a difference. One of the ways that the Parliament works behind the scenes, it's a very important part of Parliament, but a lot of people don't put too much focus on it unless they're involved in the issue, and that's these parliamentary inquiries. Now, you're the chair of the impact of renewable energy zones on rural and regional communities and industries in New South Wales. That was set up just back in July of this year. Why has this committee been established, and what do you hope to see from the committee?
Yeah, sure. So it's coming. Well, it sits in a standing committee, so a committee that's always there, and we can pick and choose what inquiries or topics we want to investigate. And that's probably a lot of the good work we do as upper house members, is run inquiries where we take these deep dives into these issues. And obviously, throughout the last state election, land use conflicts around these renewable energy projects, and not just the zones, but all the other projects that were cropping up in and around them, was a huge bone of contention. Like every New South Wales farmer's candidate forum, it was a prominent feature. So we heard quite loud and clear that this was an issue. From my personal perspective, we knew this was going to be an issue. When they passed that Electricity Infrastructure Act in 2021, there was 4 of us, myself, my colleague Robert, and the two guys from One Nation that sat and debated this bill with them for 36 hours straight, highlighting all these issues. There was over 300 amendments we tried to move to try and change their mind or make it, at least try and make it better. And a lot of the things we predicted have come to pass. So, this inquiry is obviously trying to highlight some of those issues, but also give the community a voice, because quite clearly they're not being heard through the government-run process that's been run by Energy Co. That's quite clear, because if they were being heard fairly, people like Emma, Grant Piper, and others wouldn't be coming to me, tearing their hair out with what they've been put through. So I guess that was the genesis of this inquiry. I've worked well with Emma and others on developing the terms of reference. We're really looking forward to obviously taking the show on the road and getting out into these areas and talking to people and giving them a proper voice. I think first and foremost, if I achieve anything out of this inquiry, is that the report gives those people a voice, and their concerns are actually reflected in the report, because at the moment, they're not being heard at all.
So just to give some context about what we're talking about, these renewable energy zones, there's 5 of them in New South Wales. Now, the Energy Co website describes these as modern day power stations. Now, you can see on the map, the 5 areas. You got the Central West Orana, which is 20,000 square kilometers. The New England Renewable Energy Zone, Emma gave me some documents today that says that's going to be 15,500 square kilometers. Then you've got the Hunter Central West area, the Illawarra area, and the Southwest area as well. These are incredible bits of land and area, and it's going to take up so much of these towns that are engulfed in these renewable energy zones. I want to ask you this, Emma. How hard is it for you to dig through the proposals and all the solar and wind projects that are being proposed in the Central West Orana?
Oh, look, it's very, very time consuming. It's it's time that I should be outside moving cattle, fixing fences, replacing fences. It's all time out of our businesses that could be much better spent and much more productive. But if we don't do it now, we miss the opportunity. And the trouble is, even with the opportunity to reply to a lot of this stuff, it feels like it all falls on deaf ears, but you kind of snook it either way, because if you don't reply or object or raise your concerns, they say that no one's got any issues with it. But when you do, it still seems to fall on deaf ears. So it's something that I feel obliged to do to protect my home, my family, my community, and agriculture and rural and regional Australia as a whole. But it's just it's very time consuming. It's defeating. Like it gets to the point that there's so much of it that you feel like you're wading through the mud and sort of not getting anywhere.
Last time I spoke to you, you were going through the tally of how many wind turbines and solar panels are going to be included in the Central West Orana. Where are you up to on that? I think last count it was about 1,000 wind turbines and 9 million solar panels. Is that close to the figure?
So it's not a lot different to that now. There's a couple more projects that have popped up, but the scary thing is that there's still so many projects that I'm probably not even aware of that aren't in the planning process yet. In the planning portal yet. They're being planned behind closed doors with landowners and that sort of stuff. But I think there's 4 wind projects that I know that are in this res that haven't popped up on the planning portal yet. I don't know about any other solar ones, but I don't know what's happening behind closed doors. And that's probably the scary thing, that this whole renewable energy transition, it's not being shown to us in its entirety. So we're not getting the full picture of what the cumulative impacts look like. There's nothing that shows us what it all looks like. And I think that people in the city would be very scared to see what it looks like in its entirety. And I think I think that's why it's being rolled out the way it is, because if everyone saw what it would look like in the future with all of what is planned, I don't know that many people would be on board.
I had an article published in the UK just a couple of days ago through factsforeu.org, and it's ended up GB News in the United Kingdom has done an article on it as well. And through the editing process, Lee Evans, who's the chairman of Facts for EU, was saying to me, "Can you give us some more figures? Can you give us, these other renewable energy zones? What are the size of them?" And I'm like, "Lee, you got to understand, it's not clear cut. Like, you have to, people," and I mentioned you, Emma, people have to trawl through all these documents to find just simple and basic figures of these projects. Mark, are you finding that's the feedback that you're getting from people in other areas around the country or around the state?
Yeah, look, 100%. That's exactly what we're hearing, and I'm seeing that even personally. Like, I've been based in Wollongong, I'm subject to the Illawarra res, and largely at the moment it's all based around offshore wind, and it's the same story, trawling through piles and piles of documents. In many cases, you got to be looking for what they're not saying rather than what they are saying, to get an understanding of what they're really planning. And I think that we're hearing that across the state in all the different zones. And I think it's important for your listeners to understand when this was first proposed, when the Electricity Infrastructure Act was brought up, no one from the communities was actually consulted on the location of these renewable energy zones. And in fact, I think it was the case of Illawarra and the Hunter. It was a case of other members of Parliament catching wind of this bill and going, "Oh, can I have one too in my electorate?" In case of, I think there was 2 Labor members. So, and they hadn't even consulted with their communities. It's not as if they had a mandate from an election to do this. So communities have been totally blindsided, haven't been consulted properly from the onset, and aren't being consulted properly now.
Now, Emma, you've sent me a whole bunch of Hansard documents. This proves what Mark alluded to before, the 36 hours of debating this and proposing amendments. And as he said, he was one of the people pushing back against this. Also, his colleague in the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers, along with Mark Latham and Rob Roberts. That was the main people pushing back against this stuff. Do you have a question for Mark relating to this and the foresight that these 4 people had for these projects?
I think that probably is my question, Stephen. Mark, I would like to know what made you and the other 3 MLCs so aware that this was going to be a major problem, and why do you believe that no one else would come on board with you?
Why did we have the force? I think it was just common sense. When you sit back and look at it plainly, and look, I'm a very pragmatic person, and I'm always say to people, if I can't see how an idea is going to work on the ground practically and how it's going to be practically implemented, my alarm bells start ringing. And that was the case with this. You're planning on building huge amounts of infrastructure. The government doesn't have a bottomless pit of money. So you're going to have overseas companies coming in, investors. We want to try and make this as cheap as attractive as possible for those investors. So we're going to butter them up with subsidies and the like. So I guess it was more being able to sit back and go, okay, how is this going to really work in practice? And then I guess all the gremlins started to appear. And then when you get into the detail of the legislation, you see those gremlins quite clearly. So what was the other part of the question?
Why do you believe that no one else would support you with those amendments?
Pure major party ideology. Obviously, Labor at the time were in opposition. They had a view to get into the renewable space a lot more anyway. The Libs were obviously trying to do it to, I guess, hold off the tide of teals in their North Shore electorate seats. So Matt Keane obviously thought it was a good idea to keep his Liberal Party colleagues safe. And Labor saw the Libs doing it and thought, oh, well, we might as well jump in on a unity ticket. So it's purely party ideology from the both major parties. And unfortunately, when you're in a major party, disloyalty is death. So that's why none of them crossed the floor. And you include the National Party in that in terms of the coalition with the Libs. They didn't really have an option other than to go with what their more senior part of the coalition said to do. So unfortunately, it was just four of us, debating this for 36 hours. We knew we were going to lose every single fight, but we wanted to make a point of it. So we divided on every single one of those 300 odd amendments. So just to try and ram the message home. And if they really wanted to do this to the communities, we were going to make the bastards work for it.
I don't want to downplay this because this is a serious issue, but a 36-hour sitting day, how do you get through that? I'm just imagining like members of parliament, like falling asleep, or are you just purely running on adrenaline?
Yeah, it was a bit of that. Obviously, there was the lunch break and stuff like that. And they kindly gave us a break in the morning between the first and second day. And it's a weird thing that you don't actually, given that you don't actually stop, you're still on the original day from a procedural point of view. But yeah, it was pure adrenaline. Like I still say to Mark Latham and Rod Roberts that I don't remember standing up and sitting down for all those 300 odd divisions, but I know I was there. But it just all became a blur. So pure adrenaline and just pure bloody mindedness, really. It was, as I said, we knew we were going to lose, but we were still going to put up a good fight.
Well, it's good to see that you're continuing to fight, and especially with this inquiry, the parliamentary inquiry or the committee that's happening. Now, there is a terms of reference with this, so I guess that narrows the scope to a point. Are you happy with the terms of reference that have been allocated to this committee?
Yeah, look, I'm fairly happy. I know you said it narrows it, but it's a fairly broad set of terms, and I think it gives opportunity for community to really have their say and air every grievance that they possibly could or have with this process that they're being put through. So we've done that deliberately because I don't really want to leave a stone unturned. I don't want to produce a report and then a week later after I table it, I get an email from someone saying, well, why didn't you say this? Why didn't you include this in the report, or you missed that? I really want to be able to capture everything that's going on, because if you don't know the full story, how do you fix it? How do you address all the problems if you don't know they exist? So I just encourage everyone to pour their heart out on a page. When it comes to a submission, make sure it's above 250 words, because we treat anything below that as, I guess, a pro forma, and make it individualized. Tell us how it's impacting you personally, or your community personally. Give real life examples, I guess, of your dealings with Energy Co or others, and the problems that it highlights, and also come to us with recommendations of how we can fix this, because that's the other part of a good inquiry report, is a strong set of recommendations that we can then slap the government of the day with and say, you need to fix, X, Y, Z, and here are some suggestions. And then they've got 3 months to respond to those recommendations and say what they're going to do or not do. And then that's another opportunity that we can slap them around with it and say, why not? So it gives us more power to push back against this stuff. I can't really predict what those recommendations would be, I guess, at this point, but to set some realistic expectations, the thing that would make this go away would be the repealing of that Electricity Infrastructure Act. But I guess in the political climate we have in New South Wales government, it's not going to happen, because at the moment both major parties are lockstep with each other on these renewable energy zones. So there'd be some really compelling evidence to repeal that act. I'd be happy to do it, but I'd need a huge groundswell of support from the community to see that happen. It would require a lot of political pressure being placed on the two major parties. So I strongly encourage all community members to do that.
But you have given people a lot of hope, because it wasn't just Emma that contacted me to say you need to get Mark Banasiak on. A lot of people did, because I guess they felt a lot of hope that this committee is happening and it's going forward. Emma, I mean, is this committee important to you, and what do you hope to present to the committee?
Absolutely, it's important, and I think the communities that are affected by renewable energy projects have a huge thanks to make to Mark Banasiak and the committee for letting it go ahead, because this is our opportunity to have our say. Somewhere that we're not having our say to the Department of Planning or to Energy Co. I feel that the opportunity for us is very great. I'm sad to say I haven't started my submission yet, and I probably should have, because I feel like it could read like a book. And I think there will be a lot of reading for the committee members, because there are some huge stories to come out of this. And I just hope that community members can pick themselves up and just go one more time, because I think that's where we're really going to struggle, is that so many people are tired and they're over it and they're done and just going, okay, just do what you've got to do, and we'll just either leave or bury our heads in the sand and continue on what we're doing, because that's the hard bit, is to keep picking yourself back up and saying the same thing over and over and over again, and then hoping someone will finally listen. So I think that's going to be a huge thing, is getting everyone together to, put their story on paper. And yeah, look, I hope it just shines a light on what has happened to our communities and how devastating it has been and how we've been treated. And I'm not really sure exactly what can come from it, because I agree with Mark that this isn't going to fully stop. But maybe we can make a better outcome on agriculture and rural areas. Maybe there won't be quite the saturation of projects, or, maybe they'll slow down for a moment and do the road upgrades properly before they start trying to move all this infrastructure. I'd just like to hope that if it is all going to go ahead, that we can minimise the impacts on our communities and our region, rather than just steamrolling everyone. For a start.
One of the things I've been bringing up on this podcast in the last few weeks was a document that came from the Victorian government in March 2022 that was advocating for offshore wind, and it was making the argument that if Victoria was to go to net zero just purely based on wind and solar, they would need 70% of Victoria's agricultural land to get there. Now, we're seeing similar things happen here in New South Wales. We're talking about 5 of these renewable energy zones. As I mentioned before, the Central West Orana is 20,000 square kilometres. The New England's over 15,000 square kilometres. But these projects, these wind and solar projects, aren't limited to these renewable energy zones. I was just out at Oberon recently. There's a project out there that's outside the scope of these renewable energy zones. Mark, are you concerned for New South Wales agricultural land with all these projects going ahead?
Yeah, hugely concerned. We know that the government, around the same time they were bringing in this act, they were doing work around land use mapping for agriculture. And then that's mysteriously been buried in a bottom shelf and not being brought back out again, conveniently, it seems. Because I think what it shows is that these renewable energy zones and even those other side projects are going to have a huge impact on agriculture, and it's sort of like they're wanting to keep this issue under wraps until they get these things in place, and then it's too late. But people on the other side of the argument will throw things up like, oh well, you can't eat coal and you can't eat gas, and my view is, well, you can't eat bloody wind turbines or solar panels either. You can't be taking our prime agricultural land and covering it with these things and effectively sterilising that land for 15, 20 years. Who's to say when this land's rehabilitated that anything will grow on it? No work's been done in that space. Mines are forced to rehabilitate their land once they're finished. The mine's finished its service life, but there is no end of life bonds requirement for these renewable energy zones, and I think that's a huge gap that needs to be plugged for sure.
Are you concerned about that? Because if these companies are not required to do the rehabilitation, then you would assume that the bucket will fall with the farmer that are hosting these projects on their land. And do you think a lot of these farmers are aware that could potentially be a possibility?
It's not potentially a possibility. It is a distinct possibility. In many cases, it's actually already been explicitly written into the contracts that they're going to be responsible for the remediation and removal of this infrastructure. And they've been given a payment, a monthly payment or a yearly payment as part of this, but it's not nearly enough to cover the projected costs of what this may cost them to do. So, and look, these are things that we pointed out during that 36-hour debate. And the other thing is, even if that company is still around, that's the big thing. A lot of these companies are created and fall away, and then who's responsible when that happens? They get their subsidies to do it, they make their money, and then they disappear. And who's left carrying the cost? It's the community and it's the farmers. Yeah,
that's the big problem. Now, I've put the link in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask either Emma or Mark a question or make a comment. Now, Emma, you've sent me a whole bunch of information, which goes to show how much you have to dig through with all this stuff. But you were talking about the Independent Planning Commission, the Department of Planning, and then also the Independent Expert Advisory Panel for Energy Transition, whatever the hell that is. What's the significance of those three? Okay, so the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure, which is the DPHI, so they're responsible for assessing all of the major projects, so all the state significant projects. So when an environmental impact statement, which is what all the proponents have to do, so all the wind and solar developers, they have to do that for each project. So when that project environmental impact statement goes on exhibition, it's generally for 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks.
the community gets a chance to respond to that then. So you can put in an objection or a comment or a supporting submission. So after that process, the Department of Planning then assesses the project. But if there are more than 50 unique objections to any project, or if the council in that area objects to the project must be then determined by the Independent Planning Commission. So that just means that if the Department of Planning decides that that project is approvable, they recommend approval. But then if there's enough objections to it, it goes to the Independent Planning Commission for determination. So they determine whether it's approved or rejected. So the latest one, which is why this has all come up, is the Hills of Gold wind project near Nundle, which is not even in a res. It got the number of objections, so it needed to go to the IPC, the Independent Planning Commission. The Department of Planning approved the project for 47 turbines. There were 17 turbines that they took out of the project for reasons of unmitigatable visual impacts to non-associated landowners and biodiversity impact. So the Department of Planning approved 47 turbines. The Independent Planning Commission has just approved 62 turbines because, and I can't even remember the acronym for the other one, which is part of the Department of Planning, the IEAPET, I think they're called, which has just popped up. They were tasked to see if that project was viable with 47 turbines. And they said that it wasn't. So the only way it was approvable and viable was with 62 turbines. So that's what the Independent Planning Commission has approved. Now, it's all a bit of a mouthful and a little bit of a head muck, but it just means that the government is stepping in and approving projects that would otherwise be unviable, which in my opinion, it's not the government's problem to see if a project is going to be viable. This is a private overseas company. If the project's unviable as it's approved, well, that's their problem in my mind.
It's very complex. Mark, is Emma on the money with that?
Yeah, 100% on the money. And it's really telling that, you know, they want to pick sides and basically say, well, we're going to take the side of the private investor over the community and the voting public that we're supposed to represent and serve. Yeah, the Energy Co and the Department of Planning and whatever is, they're public servants. They're there to serve the public. They're not supposed to be there serving the interests of overseas companies. And as Emma's right, if a project's not viable, you either change the project to make it viable, or you get out of Dodge and go somewhere where it is viable. It's pretty simple. But once again, this is something we predicted, that the government would bend over backwards and play skullduggery, change the rules, do whatever it could to accommodate the wishes and the needs of overseas rent seekers.
I interviewed Vicky Campion on Monday, and she was telling me about the Canberra Parliament, like the federal Parliament, and the amount of lobbying that takes place there. Is it similar in the New South Wales Parliament? And are some of these overseas rent seekers, as you call them, are they lobbying some of these parliamentarians?
Oh, look, I'm sure they are. I guess there is some level of transparency in that with ministerial diaries, but I guess for other individual members of Parliament, there isn't that level of transparency. People can have meetings with whoever they want. They don't necessarily need to declare it. If you know who's who in the zoo, you can probably pick them out, stalking the corridors of Parliament on a sitting week. But if you don't know who they are, then it'd be very hard to, work out who's who they are, when they're walking around. But most certainly it does happen, because we're talking about serious money that's being thrown around.
And this is not just happening in New South Wales; it's happening all across the states in Australia. But this push to net zero is happening across the Western world. In many cases, I'm finding that speaking to people in other countries, and as I mentioned before, I recently worked on an article in the UK with Facts for EU. Because they're concerned about what's happening here in Australia, because they're almost looking into a crystal ball of what's happening here and thinking about what could happen there in England. We've had a caller call in. It's actually Lee Evans, the chairman of Facts for EU. Lee, welcome to Commanding the Narrative, or welcome back, because I know you've been on before. Do you have some comments for today's discussion?
I just want to throw in a few words of optimism and hope, if I may. Stephen's quite right that this is being picked up globally now. You're not alone. And I was talking yesterday to a director of our fastest growing 24-hour news channel in the UK, that's GB News, about this very topic and mentioning your plight over there. And they're going to be running something with hopefully interviewing Stephen and myself about it in the next 2 or 3 days. So it was really just, I wanted to give all of our Australian friends a message that we are aware, and if your own media is not giving it sufficient attention, we'll make sure that it happens over our side of the world, in the UK, in Europe, and in the States.
And Lee, this is the article here that you and I both worked on. Are you getting any feedback from your audience in the UK? Are they reading this stuff amazed at what's happening here in New South Wales?
I think surprise has been, or shock has been the big one. And what we've been doing is saying, look, if it can happen to Australia, it can happen, albeit on a smaller scale, because of our the size of Australia compared to the size of European countries. But it can happen to us too. And we have a new government, as I'm sure you know, a new Labour government, with an energy secretary who is green with steroids, I would say. He's got a long history of backing what are highly implausible scientific arguments from our perspective. And so it's a bit worrying what we might be facing down the road. So there's a little bit of self-interest for us in this, but we would back you anyway on what you're doing. So more power to your elbows.
So Lee, what you're basically saying is that there's pressure on Mr. Banasiak not only to look after New South Wales, but the whole world.
I'm sorry, Mark, but if I may call you that, but we may well be interviewing you ourselves in the future over here and trying to get the message out. But certainly I've got Stephen lined up. So now with that, I'm afraid my ambulance has just arrived to take me to some nuclear medicine centre in Montpellier Hospital. I'm down in the south of France at the moment. So from the south of France, I will bid you farewell and wish me luck in that great machine that they're going to shove me in about an hour's time.
Okay, Lee, we'll let you go. Thank you for making your contribution today and everything that you do at Facts for EU. Thanks, mate.
And well done, everyone there, for the fight you're putting up. We're behind you all the way. Got to rush.
Thanks.
Oops, sorry. As Lee kind of alluded to, he's struggling with cancer at the moment, and he's doing tremendous work. I mean, he's fighting really hard every day for not just the UK, but issues here in Australia as well. Mark, there's talk about a agriculture commissioner, and you've told me that it's only going to be a part-time role. What are your feelings about that?
It's pretty bloody ridiculous. This is a position that we've been calling for quite some time now. We campaigned on it. New South Wales farmers were very strong on it as well. and very strong on the fact that it needed to be legislated. So it needed to be a statutory position, and it needed to actually have some teeth and some grunt, some actual powers. And what we're hearing now is that, yes, it's going to be legislated, but it's looking like it's only going to be a part-time gig. And just with the sheer size of this issue in terms of land use conflicts, which I alluded to at the beginning, like it's encompassed everyone's lives so much. For it to be a part-time gig and no clear idea of its role in this issue, it's really concerning. I raised it with the minister in budget estimates just the other week. I tried to tease out of how is this agriculture commissioner going to actually interact with the renewable energy zones? Is there going to be a place for it in the planning process? And couldn't really get any clear answer. And I think that's probably quite telling, given that we're probably going to be debating this legislation in a couple of weeks in Parliament, and she can't give a clear indication as to what an agriculture commissioner is going to do. I think there should be some clear interventions by an agriculture commissioner in the planning space, probably at the very earliest possible point with these projects in these zones. I think there should be that line in the sand that the agriculture commissioner should be able to say and go, this project has too great a risk on agricultural land, therefore don't pass go. Don't collect $200. We don't go down this track any further and put community members through the headaches and the heartache of having to do all these submissions. If it can't pass that pub test at the beginning, I think the agriculture commissioner should be able to make a determination to say, go away. Basically come back with another idea. But we'll have to see what the minister presents the next sitting week or the sitting week after. But I guess if it's not up to scratch, we'll be probably moving some amendments to try and make it be up to scratch. It needs to have some grunt and teeth, a bit like the livestock commissioner in Yellowstone. So something with a bit of balls that's going to actually stand up and represent the community. So,
and I live here in the northern beaches of Sydney, and federally I'm surrounded by teals. We have Chris Bowman in Sydney, Tanya Plebiscite in Sydney, Anthony Albanese, all federal ministers, all confined in the Sydney Basin, pushing a lot of these projects federally. In the state parliament, Matt Keane previously, when he was in the parliament, represented Hornsby. Here in Manly, our state member was the environment minister, I'm pretty sure. Do you feel like the rest of New South Wales, the rural and regional areas of New South Wales, are underrepresented when it comes to a lot of these decisions? Because essentially these city parliamentarians are pushing these projects, but they don't want them in their backyard. They're pushing them out on country communities.
Yeah, well, look, 100%. And I think that's why, as a party, we've been able to grow and develop and I guess garner more support and votes, because people aren't feeling represented by those inner city members. Okay, there might be an argument that there's less votes out in the bush, but it doesn't make those votes any less important. It's the people out in the bush that feed the people in the city. And I go back to that comment: you can't feed people with solar panels and wind turbines. You need good agricultural land, and we're seeing that being swallowed up by these projects.
Since the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on the right-leaning minor parties like One Nation, the Libertarian Party, the UAP, even though that seems to be defunct. There doesn't seem to be a focus on the shooters, fishers, and farmers, or at least they don't get included in that conversation for some reason. Why do you think that is?
I guess, look, we were, I think, quite successful in 2019. And I think that scared the major parties a fair bit. And from that, we saw a a conscious effort to, I guess, silence us in mainstream Sydney media. Like, we still get a lot of engagement with rural media and regional media, but the big major mainstream media in Sydney just doesn't give us the time of day. They don't give minor parties the time of day in general, unless they're doing something silly, or that party is saying something silly, and we generally try and avoid saying or doing things that are a bit silly to get that negative attention. So we just quietly plod along and just do our best in representing those people's views. And my view on a lot of media is, if you do all the hard yards talking to the people on the ground, someone else can come along and steal the press release. But the people that need to know how something came about do know, because you were there from the beginning, engaging with them. And that's how I've always that's always been my approach to politics and media and dealing with the community, is community first, media a very distant second. It's more about representing the people. And if you're doing a good job, those people will spread the word, naturally in a better way.
And Emma, you've obviously, I can assume you've been desperate to reach out to parliamentarians to get some sort of support, or at least understanding. How have your dealings been with Mark? And are there any other parliamentarians that you'd like to highlight that have at least maybe listened to your arguments, or maybe helped you behind the scenes?
Mark has been excellent, and on behalf of Sal and myself, I would like to thank you, Mark, because we couldn't have got half as far as we have without your help. The other MLC that I would like to mention is John Ruddock. John has spent a bit of time with us. He came on a tour around the area with us earlier in the year, and John's also been very good at answering any questions that we have. So yes, both of you, we couldn't have done half of what we've done without you, and we are very, very grateful, because it is very hard to get in the door with any parliamentarian. So it's nice to have some that that you can pick up the phone or send an email, and that you're going to get a response, and it's very refreshing.
No, that's excellent. I've got a question here from Sally Edwards. There's a bit of a lengthy question here. I might take that off the screen and just read it here. Why is it that the New South Wales government found that underground transmission is not feasible, essentially due to cost prohibitors, which also prevents redirecting large-scale renewables off prime agricultural land to more marginal land, citing that it is too far and costly from where the power is needed? Yet the Australian and Northern Territory government, moving forward with Australia's biggest solar project near Tennant Creek, is aiming to supply power underground and under the sea to Singapore. I know that was a bit of a lengthy question, Mark, but basically what Sally's saying is that we can't have underground transmission here in New South Wales, but we can have an underground cable to Singapore to provide them with renewable energy.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The argument from the government doesn't stack up at all. I wasn't on those two inquiries that sort of looked into this, but I'm aware of some of the evidence that was presented, and I think it's a case of the government just wants to ram this through, and will do so in any way they can, and they don't want to deviate from their plans. And they're using Energy Co, who is a really bad actor in this, to ram this home and ride roughshod over individual landholders. And I've got countless examples of farmers that have come to me and outlining how they've been railroaded by Energy Co about the transmission lines. And I think I think Sal's question is a very good point that we haven't really touched on. It's not just the panels and the wind turbines, it's the transmission lines that come from these zones that will be stretching across people's land and effectively sterilising that land too for agricultural production. There's exclusion zones around these transmission lines, there's concerns around fire risk, etc. And none of that's been accounted for. So, the government's argument is garbage. Of course, if we can build an underground cable to Singapore, we could do it across our own land. It's just a case of the will to do it, and the will with this government is not there.
And I think, if I could, Stephen, one more thing to add to that, and probably part of Sal's point too, is that, there's a lot of area out in far western New South Wales, and some of them may well welcome an extra income because their land is marginal at producing. Whereas what we're putting wind turbines and solar panels and transmission lines all over in the Central West, even in the New England, it is the prime productive ag land. Even the ag land that they're saying is not as productive in these areas, it all plays its part in producing a lot of food and fiber. And, I've grown up in the Central West, and I know that we've always been touted as being a, safe area. There can be droughts other places, and we're normally, we've been through bad droughts as well, but we can normally hang on. And I think that is one of the biggest errors that's been made in all of this, is that, when they classify ag land, they're just saying, oh no, it's just one big area and it all produces the same. Well, it's not the case. And, the reasons we are told that all of this infrastructure can't go further out west is because they can't get the power to where it needs to go. And, to Sal's point, if they can do it in the Northern Territory and get it underground to Singapore, well, I think that argument's been blown well and truly out of the water.
Mark, do you think it's just a case of some bureaucrat somewhere or a parliamentarian looking at a map and just going, oh yeah, that looks good?
Yeah.
And not knowing the area specifically?
Yeah, 100%. I'd go back to my comments about, members of parliament hearing about this bill and going, oh, can I have a renewable energy zone too? I think it'll be good. And they always come back to the jobs line. It's going to create so many jobs in the area. But the reality is most of those jobs are temporary. Most of those jobs are fly in, fly out. You only need to look at the social pages of community groups, and there's all these people from either outside the area or even outside the country looking for a room to rent while they work on these projects. So the jobs arguments are furphy. Even if they were local jobs, they're only most of the time it's only temporary, and then they disappear. So how's that a good outcome for regional rural communities? You give them a little peak in economic activity, and then you rip it out from underneath them a couple years later. We want to be able to create communities that are self-sustaining and don't need to keep coming back with their hand out. That's not going to do that. You're just going to make the problem even worse in terms of regional rural communities struggling. So I'm lost for words with some of the stupidity in this.
Yeah, you must be pulling your hair out in that parliament and hearing some of the arguments.
Yeah, it is. I said, to debate 36 hours and be predicting a lot of these things that were going to come true and have come true. It's extremely frustrating. It's an example of when Parliament doesn't work well, where people just vote along party lines and ideologies, and there's no independent thinking, and no one stops and goes, oh, hang on, maybe they're onto something. Maybe we should pause. Maybe we should do some more work in this space. Maybe we should actually talk to the community before we drop a res on them. It's an example of, I think, governance gone wrong.
Well, look, mate, thank you for everything that you're doing, and thank you for your time today. I know it's a valuable time because you are in the parliament. I can see you in the parliament right now. What's your final message to people in regards to this committee and the inquiry that you're doing, what would you like to hear from the community?
As I said, I want to hear about how it's personally impacting them, how the process is being done to them, not necessarily done with them. Examples of that, examples of potential conflicts of interest, which I know are out there, in terms of the Independent Planning Commission and Energy Co. I just leave no stone unturned. Vent your spleen totally. I actually want to see the Parliament system break in terms of the number of submissions. So just go, as Emma said, dig deep one more time and go your hardest, because you do have people in this place that are actually listening and taking note. But we need, I guess, the community's voice to make sure that the others in Parliament finally get the message. We draw our power from the power of the community. We couldn't do half the stuff that we did if there wasn't people like Emma and Sal and others standing behind us fighting as well. So a huge thank you to Emma. I know she's thanked me, but a huge thanks to Emma and Sal and others in the community that have been fighting this along the way with us. So well done.
Yeah. No, thank you also from me, Emma. I don't know how you get through all this work. And look, you shouldn't have to be giving up your time to go through all these documents and pull this stuff apart. So a big thank you from me, and I'm sure a big thank you from the audience as well. And I'll definitely have you back on in the future. But do you have any final comments before we finish up today?
Probably one thing is just thank you to you, Stephen. I know that you've worked long and hard to get people on to talk about this every week, and we do appreciate your help as well. Another thank you to Mark, and I have to throw a big shout out to Sal Edwards. I probably would still not have my head screwed on my shoulders without Sal's assistance and her backing through all of this, and all of the other people that have stood up and thrown their hat in the ring, especially, those that are standing up for trying to get into Parliament to help people like Mark, help people like John Ruddock, help us get through all of this stuff and, figure a bit of stuff out for rural and regional Australia so that we can just keep feeding the country and we can be just busted ass farmers and not have to worry about the rest of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Now, look, Mark, you do have a website, markbanasiak.com.au. Is that the best way for people to follow you and everything that you're doing?
I guess that, and probably be more, Facebook. Facebook probably gets updated a bit more regularly in terms of, comings and goings in the House. Obviously, if they're signed up as a party member, they'll get regular email updates in terms of what we're doing as a party. But probably Facebook and Instagram is probably the best way to follow what we're doing. And of course, they can message me on that, or they can email me as well. My parliamentary email address is also available on the website. So I am quite responsive to that, as Emma has alluded. I do all my own stunts. I answer all my own emails. I'm more than happy.
No, you are allowed to have a staff, mate.
I do have staff. But I do make a point of trying to answer all my emails personally.
That's excellent.
I think it's the right thing to do. People have taken the time to email me. I don't want to give them a bullshit Mickey Mouse performer response back.
And to make things very, very clear for people, how do they make a submission to the committee?
Jump on the parliamentary website, which I think you had up earlier. There's a tab there that says submissions. They can email a submission in. There is also going to be an online questionnaire as well. So if you're not really into long-worded submissions, or you're not great at writing, there's an online question there too that can step you through some multiple choice and short answer questions that just sort of tease out your issues with the process. So
can anyone in the state fill in that questionnaire, or do they have to be within
anyone in the state, anyone in the country, basically? Obviously, it's going to be more poignant if it's people from within New South Wales, but there's nothing precluding people from interstate also engaging with it as well. particularly you look at the Southwest Riverina res, there's potential impacts across the border there too that we might not have considered. So I don't want to limit it to New South Wales. Everyone jump in and tell us what you think.
Yeah, no, it's a big, massive issue. And look, thank you again, Mark. Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate you guys coming on and highlighting this issue. It is a big, massive issue. And the more that I dig, the more I find horrific things about it. So it's just incredible that all this stuff is going on. But to the audience, I say it every single time, please share this information out. But not only this interview today, I'm going to ask you to also share the fact that you can actually make a submission to this committee and this inquiry, because I think that's incredibly important. As Mark said, if we can overload the Parliament with submissions, I think that makes a significant statement to the New South Wales government that people are just not happy about this stuff, and it is a significant issue and it is quite serious. But thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.